Legendary weather and climate forecaster and weather and climate historian Joe Bastardi's new book, The Weaponization of Weather in the Phony Climate War, lays out exactly how those who want Americans to turn over control of our energy policy and infrastructure, with dire consequences for our everyday lives, have turned ordinary weather into a political superweapon. Tonight on From the Stacks, we'll show you how and how you can shield yourself and your nation from climate change hysteria.
Good evening. Welcome to From the Stacks, a live discussion from the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. If you have a question during tonight's live stream, put it in the comments box. I'll be monitoring that and we'll do our best to answer your questions live. We would also appreciate it if you'd take a few seconds and share this live stream with your friends and invite them to join in. In tonight's program, we're going to discuss Joe Bastardi's new book, The Weaponization of Weather in the Phony Climate War. If you'd like a free copy of this fascinating book, we'll gladly send you one as our thanks when you give a 100% tax-deductible donation of any amount. Just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, make your donation, and in the comments section, mention promo code 20-1020-10 or ask for the weaponization of weather.
Thank you, Megan. And I'm Cal Beisner. I'm the founder and national spokesman of the Cornwall Alliance. And as you just saw there from the front cover of Joe's brand new book, The Weaponization of Weather in the Phony Climate War, Joe is a man with a sense of humor and a man who likes to kind of get in your face. That cover photo is actually a photo of himself. So here we have tonight with us 45-year veteran weather forecaster and historian, Joe Bastardi. Joe is the chief forecaster for Weatherbell Analytics, author of the previous book, The Climate Chronicles, Inconvenient Revelations You Won't Hear from Al Gore and Others, and now of the new Weaponization of Weather in the Phony Climate War. Joe, welcome to the program. And even though we've got a little difficulty in terms of technology here, you'll be coming in on my cell phone's speaker, so we'll be able to hear through that. Please just tell us a bit about yourself, what got you into meteorology and weather forecasting and weather history, and why does that background make you particularly equipped to assess claims of unprecedented global warming and weather fluctuations driven by it?
Well, first of all, thank you for the nice introduction. All right. My mother probably wrote that, but this is all I've wanted to do since I was 2 or 3 years old. It's my first memory. My dad's a meteorologist who graduated from Texas A&M in 1965. Went to school at the age of 31 and had the whole bunch of us down there in Aggie land. And at that time, if you were a Rhode Islander with a funny last name like ours, you can imagine the culture shock down there. I even though I wrestled at Penn State, I still bleed maroon and white. There's been a lot of bleeding when the Aggies actually play, as we all know. But, when you're raised by the kind of people I was raised by, and, I was raised in a strict Catholic background, for instance, in a very strict background as far as being brought up, taught, hard work and, focusing on the ability that you were given. I naturally gravitated to the weather. And, I look at my son, I think it runs in the blood. He's like that now too. Over the years, it has evolved, though, to a situation where, as I've gotten older, I've become more and more appreciative, not of the weather, but the power behind the throne, our Heavenly Father, and the majestic creation that He's made. And I'm blessed that I know enough about how it works where I just marvel at it constantly. And what we have here today and in the book, Dr. Bison was talking about the political aspect. I love to be on a Christian broadcast network or something like this because I could talk freely. This is also a spiritual battle. It's man's relevant truth versus God and nature's absolute truth. And that's what you're seeing going on when you have socialism, Marxism. That is a relevant truth. It's a shifting type of thing meant to get in the way of other truths. It's because of control. So naturally, the climate has evolved into that with the arrogance that you can actually control what you didn't create, control an infinite system, and the ignorance of what actually did occur before. I don't know if it's willful ignorance, or I don't know if it's just something that they know. I doubt if they know as many weather situations as I do, since this is all I've done for so long. The big difference between me and everybody else and a lot of people is I forecast the weather. And I forecast in the private sector. And I learned from my father, my earthly father, that the foundation you stand on today was built yesterday to reach for tomorrow. He used to always say, when I was a kid, my dad would recall storms all the time and tell me about how they behaved. And I naturally went to look at those storms, and I've looked at so many that what happens is when something shows up and someone tells me it's the worst ever, I simply say, no, it's not. I've got 5, 10 examples of it. So in the book, you're going to see, I guess there's 8 to 10 chapters just on weaponization of different weather events and how you visibly call them out. And the big problem today is that we have an entire and again, this smoke screen, this relevant truth that is getting in the way of seeing absolute truth. And the purpose of it is, every once in a while, men knock the ball out of the park. Their will aligns with our Heavenly Father's divine will. And then you're supposedly unstoppable. And the reason why the country has been unstoppable is that opening line of the Declaration of Independence is an absolute truth, that you are endowed by your Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And therefore, anything that gets in the way of that can limit free will, free choice, free agency, which is God's greatest gift to man, besides eternal salvation, anything that could get in the way of that to limit your chance to have a life, limit your chance for happiness. Well, guess what that's all about? So, I guess I've, over the years and reading some of the things I've read and putting one and one together, being involved in this so long, after a while I said, listen, this has got to be about something different. And it certainly is. And one of the things that I resent the most is that what I've loved has been dragged through the mud in the cesspool of politics and agenda. When I was a kid or I was in college, if you ever told me that weather will become political and a weapon, I'd be like, what are you, out of your mind? No one cares except us nerds, right? Well, guess what's happened? I mean, even that, they've dug into that. And you can see what the results are. I mean, we're at the precipice with something like this because, I got a kick out of the Democratic vice presidential candidate. Tom Steyer's pouring all this money into him, and he denies that something that's at the heart of his site, the Green New Deal. I went on his website and looked at it. And it's the main framework for what he wants to do with the environment. And I'm like, and you deny you support it. And this is what's going on here, that there's all deception at work here. And there's deception in the weather, there's deception. And who's the father of deception? That's for you to answer. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah.
Well, Joe,
Megan?
I'm hearing from our producer that the sound is working. So if you want to try hanging up, it should work.
I'm sorry, Megan. I'm having trouble hearing you. You're hearing from the producer what?
that the sound is
Oh,
working.
Joe. Yeah, Joe, your sound is now working, so you can hang up the phone and we can go without the phones.
My sound is working?
Yeah,
Oh,
it just
Yep.
started.
all right. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
It's a
indeed.
festive. Now let me see
Yeah,
if
I
I
don't
can
know what
hear
happened.
you. Now I can't
Can
hear
you hear
you.
us?
Hold on. Hold on. Go on.
Can you hear us
Someone
now?
say something. I
I'm
can hear you.
Yep.
speaking. Oh, great.
All
Awesome.
right.
Well, this is great. I'm so glad that technology finally worked. Well, can you give us a quick description of your new book? What's the central theme? Why should our viewers read it?
Well, the primary theme, the first chapter, is what's this really all about, and it just delves into what I was talking about. There's a spiritual aspect involved in this, and when I wrote the first book, what I was done, and I told Sean this on his show, Sean Hannity, that I left something in the basement. You know, it's like from Rocky. I left something in the basement. I'm gonna come out swinging again, right? So what happened? Rocky Six, great movie. But what happened was I realized that there were things I did not say, and there's actually a tribute in there to Sean Hannity, not because I'm dropping his name, because he got on my case when I was on set with him in Hurricane Dorian. Said, "You got to take that chapter 3 of your other book and write an entire book on it, the weaponization of weather." I'm the guy that coined that term. All right. And it was first, I used to say it before, and they put it in the book, the first book. So I realized that, I had a relatively minor chapter called In God We Trust or Do We? And I say, you know something? Who are you and what do you really believe? Well, if you're a child of the most heavenly Father and you really believe that, you got to do what you were made to do, and that's to tell the truth about things. So I felt that I should include that. It's obvious now what the political agenda is, but that's we've known about that for years. It's just that the American public sways to the cadence of complacency and has been unaware. And in addition, the indoctrination that has led to the irrational fear has got a whole generation just afraid of something in a very irrational manner. Now, so what I do is I handle those two aspects. Then I go into chapter after chapter, just banging away: weaponization of drought, weaponization of hurricanes, weaponization of floods, one thing after another. I didn't really want to do it, but I delve into COVID a little bit because I believe COVID's a serious problem. But they instantly began to piggyback climate onto COVID. And so, well, we got to do the same thing with climate, shut everything down, right? And by the way, during the COVID shutdown, the global shutdown, CO2 just went up on its merry way, and that's because I believe that the oceans that outsources CO2, and then you pull into something, and at the end of it, where I talk about uh, how to diffuse this issue. All right, chapter 14, to weaponize the battlefield with just, it's a plan. I can't see how anybody on the other side could argue with planning, literally a global tree planting plan, which is what the Republicans actually are trying to push in Congress. But of course, that's not getting any traction. Nuclear power, I can't figure out how we're still hostage to Jane Fonda and the China syndrome. And then, this is America in 2020. We should be able to have safe nuclear power, which is, and by the way, James Hansen actually agrees with that, the so-called godfather of global warming, and carbon
Right.
capture. And then there's an economic plan, Megan, that I'm looking at that I support, but I didn't get into that there. But we don't need to spend $10 trillion to solve what could be an imaginary problem. All right, but I do understand the fear. I don't like people walking around terrorized. It's why I wear a mask. Okay, it's not hurting me, so I'll wear a mask. If people are afraid of COVID, I understand that, right? Well, in this particular situation, we can get rid of this issue very easily without the draconian ideas that are being presented for the obvious reason now. That's political, it's agenda driven, and is simply a vehicle to redistribute wealth.
Well, in the weaponization of weather, you write early on the weapon in this age of instant communication is depicting all events as out of the ordinary. It works because many people have a poor or even non-existent understanding of the past. Explain that for us a bit. How does depicting all events, all weather events especially, as out of the ordinary weaponize them?
Well, most people aren't weather nuts like me. You know, I've told people all the time I've had no life except for my life is my family, good Lord above, and the weather, and that's it. And before my family, I'm ashamed to say that even though I've always loved the good Lord above, sometimes weather came in front of the good Lord above. Okay, all right. So at least I'll admit that. But as I realized that weather and my ability uh, or the delusion I have of myself with the ability are a gift, I've focused a little bit more on that particular aspect. So what happens is if you don't know this stuff, right? It's an old John Mellencamp saying: if you'll fall for anything if you stand for nothing. If you don't know something, and someone in so-called authority actually, says something, you go, "Oh my gosh!" Imagine you're sitting in a class and you know your grade depends on what the professor teaches you. Okay, well, if he just teaches you one side of the issue, what are you going to do? All right. Well, my son told me that, he gets into these classes and he knows the answers that the teacher wants. He doesn't believe them, but he's got to get an A. So, I mean, that's the way it has become today. And what is really a shame is there's no critical thinking. All right. You see, people go, well, these people are liberal and conservative. No, they're not liberal. They're closed minded and intolerant. They're exactly opposite of the way I was brought up. I think I'm the liberal, open minded guy who loves to be challenged. So all these things are wound into the book. You've got to understand that you're just not dealing with one aspect here. You're dealing with one of the tentacles of a giant octopus, whether it's healthcare or whatever, that is doing this, and climate, because of what we've done to our kids and what they are fed constantly. You turn on the Weather Channel and they're constantly slamming away at this stuff. They won't show you what happened in the 1930s. All right, they won't show you the fact that Hurricane Carla, for instance, which hit where Harvey did, gave hurricane force winds all the way from Brownsville to Lake Charles, Louisiana. I still can't believe that a storm was that big, or wind gust 186 miles an hour at Blue Hill, southwest of Boston, Massachusetts, with a 38 hurricane. These kids don't know what happened before. They don't know about the Dust Bowl in the 30s. So what happens is, I mean, it's so Orwellian. You erase the past and you say the latest is the greatest, and everybody has to do what they're told. And you know, I, 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 I get into trouble with a lot of people on my side of the issue because I fight for a completely different, want to call it a fight. I mean, that's another thing. It's a phony war because we're not warriors. I'm no warrior. I've never been war. Fighting a battle to save the planet. This is ridiculous. Why don't you actually go talk to someone who's seen his buddy blown up in front of him or something like that, right? Or you think you're some kind of hero. It is bizarre what I see going on. There's an intersection of all these things that are going on in front of me that run
Really?
counter to just simply pursuing the truth in front of your heavenly Father. That's it
Yeah.
right there. That's all I do.
All right. All right, Joe. Well, let's start looking now at some of the different weapons in terms of claims that new things are happening in weather driven by man-made climate change that have supposedly never happened before. Uh, the different weapons that climate alarmists are using. In 8 different chapters, you treat the weaponization of drought, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, global temperature, global weirding, whatever that means, climate models, and the weaponization of academia. So let's start with drought. Now, as you wrote of climate alarmists' claims that the 2010 through 2012 droughts in the US were, quote, the beginning of a perma drought, as among the most egregious falsehoods you've seen, give us the lowdown on that. What were the claims and what was wrong with them? And you provided a couple of really helpful graphs about that, comparing the 2010 to 2012 drought seasons with the 1952 to 1954 drought seasons. I
Yeah.
think our
Well,
producer
the
can
reason
get
I know
those up on
about
the screen in front of us.
the reason you know about the 52 to 54 drought is if you grew up in Aggie land, you know about the 54 Junction Boys, and it was the end of the worst drought period in Texas history. And so I knew about that drought, and I went and researched what happened, and it reversed within 3 years. And I simply made the prediction it was going to reverse because the weather pattern in the early 50s looked a lot like 2010 to 2012. We came off an El Nino in the early 50s, went into the La Nina like that. The natural response was this particular situation. It was even worse in the 1930s. And sure enough, from 57 on, everything reversed. The same thing happened. The same thing happened where, look at that in the 30s. Holy smokes. That's just almost inconceivable. That, folks, that is 5 months in 30 through 39, the heart of the growing season in the breadbasket of the country. There's been nothing like that ever since. And of course now, and it's water vapor. It has to be water vapor because first of all, with the oceans warming, and the oceans don't warm because of CO2. There's a natural cyclical process that does that. But what happens is extra water vapor in the air. If it were truly warming aloft, you wouldn't be getting more precipitation because the increased water vapor at low levels of the atmosphere not only prevents temperatures from falling as much as at night, but it also leads to quicker condensation rates if the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere are not warming in tandem with that, and that's what's going on. So you're getting some low-level warming directly related to that. But look what happened here. Someone wants to tell me this is the worst drought ever. I go, well, first of all, how the heck did that happen when CO2 was so low in the 30s? And why can't it happen again? Fortunately, it probably can't happen again because the climate is better now than it was in the 1930s. I mean, that's another inconvenient truth. But anyway, you could see the August to September 2010 to 2012. It's a bad drought in Texas, not nearly as bad as what happened back in the 50s in a larger area of the country, and certainly the 1930s. I mean, you, you really can't make this stuff up with what you're seeing. I mean, so in the book, I just simply, you know what? I don't have to get into the theories. I'll just show the actual evidence. All right.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about your work, Joe, is that it is so empirically based. You're not depending on climate models and things like that. You're
Well,
looking at
they're
the
useful.
empirical evidence.
You get branded anti-science because you say it's not that I don't use models, for goodness sakes, but they're tools. They're not the answer. They're ways to get an answer. Why would someone outsource their abilities to a model? You look at this hurricane that's going crazy in the Western Caribbean. We've been saying, I said back at the beginning of the season, this is a season for a major October hurricane. When Sally and Beta were going on, I said the season would shut down, we're getting a major October hurricane. It was as plain as the nose on my Italian face what was going to go on. And here comes this tropical wave into the Caribbean, and I'm going, this is our major right here. And so what happens? It happens and it's shocking. Oh, look at that. It's a sign of global warming. It's amazing watching what's going on. It's because these guys are staring at models. They're not looking at the weather. This thing in the Western Caribbean, folks, that was out of my tropical meteorology class at Penn State in the 70s when people actually had to look at the weather. We didn't have
Yeah.
computers. So anyway, but
Yeah.
that's the point of all this.
Megan, would you tell the folks again how they can get Joe's new book?
Yes. I just actually put the donation link in the Facebook comments, so you can click there if you'd like. We are giving away free Joe's new book. When you give a donation of any amount, it's 100% tax deductible. You'll receive the Weaponization of Weather in the Phony Climate War. But we do ask that you put in the comments box that you want the book. So either put Weaponization of Weather or promo code 20-10. Or if you forget, send me an email, Megan, MEGAN, at cornwallalliance.org, and I'll make sure you get the book.
And by the
By
comments
the way,
box there,
let me
Megan,
say
you
something in the
meant
audience.
if
Oh
Let me
yes,
say something
if
in
I
the
the
audience.
comments box in the donation page. Although if you do put a comment on Facebook, I'll see that too.
right.
The cover is a satire. Okay, I have a toy machine gun with daisies because I'm an old greenie. Okay, believe me, 25, 30. I'm still competing bodybuilding, but I was a lot bigger 25 or 30 years ago. And you see the
Well, you
peace
wrestled
symbol
in
in there
college,
in my
right?
name, Joe. Pardon me.
You
I'm,
wrestled in
I'm
college,
sorry.
didn't you?
Yeah, I wrestled in college, although people at Penn State when I was wrestling thought I was doing something else. I actually was unbeaten at 167, one match. But what I'm saying is I'm playing around, and you know what? For people who are on the other side, you're not warriors. You're not saving the planet. For someone like me, and I'm sure that most of the viewers here, the planet was saved a couple thousand years ago. It's made for your use and benefit. You don't trash it, but you have to understand what is going on, and people are going to use this just like they're going to try to use anything. And they, like I said before, they came in and they've weaponized what I've loved very much. I'm not I'm not trying to be messianic here, okay? But I want you to think about something. Even our Jesus got mad. Why do you get mad? Because something he loved, right, in the temple was being trashed, right? Because people say to me, "Oh, you get all mad about this or this or that." Yeah, because something I love and believe is a gift is being trashed. It's no different to me than if someone came into my house and started, trying to, go after my wife or my kids or something like that. So you got to understand when you have a love like this, you are indebted and you have gratitude for that love. Now, I'm not talking about getting into a fight with anyone, a fist fight or something like that. I'm talking about you're going to stand up and try to tell the truth and say to people, look, you don't have to believe me. Go look for yourself. If you don't, fine, but at least look at the other side of the issue. That's what the book is about.
That's great. Well, Joe, can you tell us a little bit about tornadoes? A lot of people have said global warming is causing more and stronger tornadoes, but as you show in your book, the bulk of the most damaging tornadoes occurred when the planet was colder. So, why would a colder climate produce more extreme tornadoes?
Zonal potential, what we call zonal potential energy, when it warms too much to the north and it doesn't warm as much to the south, the temperature gradient becomes less, and you need that strong temperature gradient. The 2011 season was very cold over the northwest part of the United States, very warm in the southeast, and we had a mega season. In fact, where we're really going to be in trouble, and there will be an increase in extremes, is when the Earth starts to cool again, which is, I don't think it's going to do it until I see the oceans start to cool. And I'm probably going to be witnessing that from, I hope, a nice vantage point up in heaven, but not in my lifetime. Okay, so and I get into Megan arguments with guys on my side of the issue. They're all low solar, low solar. Well, there are reasons why low solar initially will cause it to get warmer, believe it or not. But when you don't have a normal distribution of temperature, all right,
Mhm.
the effects on what we call global wind oscillation, mean sea level pressures, especially with tornado season, especially with hurricane season, creates different type of aspects. I mean, when you look at the fact that the Pacific, I'll give you an example with the Pacific, with the hurricanes, they're shut down this year. They're on a pace for record lows. I don't think they're going to get it because there's going to be a burst in the Pacific. So the Atlantic is forced to take up slack. The reason why that's happening in the Pacific is because the equatorial waters are cooling with the new La Nina. The waters in the north are very warm. So what we call the incubation of heat in the tropics isn't occurring. It's spread out. Hurricanes need convergence. And that's why, for those of you who follow me on Weather Bell, you saw me say, I don't care where it comes from. We're going to have a couple of hurricanes in close to the coast during September because it was a cold shot down into the plains. And even when those hurricanes were going, I said, same thing's going to happen in October. Once I detected that the cold shot was coming, I knew we would see the response. That's just tropical meteorology 101. If you were in my classes back in the 1970s, now maybe not too many people are. So what happens is you have a distortion of the global temperature, and it's not all bad. And as a matter of fact, where life thrives, there's been relatively little change in temperatures, mostly in the colder, drier climates, and mainly during their winter seasons. So you look at what's going on in the Arctic, there's been no increase in the summer temperature. All right. Now, that could directly be linked to water vapor. Why? Because if you understand what we call saturation mixing ratios, you understand that the more water vapor in the air, the bigger effect it has on the lower temperatures. There's a 10-degree correlation, 10-degree rise correlation between minus 30 and minus 40 uh, Fahrenheit, minus 40 up to minus 30, okay, with only 1/10 of a gram per kilogram of water vapor. You have to get, let's see, what was it? Let me go through 100 times as much to get a 1 degree change between 80 and 90. All right.
Hmm.
So more water vapor goes into the air, it spreads out throughout the planet, right? And guess where it warms up, right? What does that do then? That creates this what I call distortion of temperatures. And you know what? This is the golden age for guys like me forecasting because the models can't handle it. And so you get a chance to beat the models for your clients. So, but you have to be aware of what's going on. So I love this
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Um, we're going to have to kind of move along pretty quickly through some of the next ones here. So, what you've basically told us is there's been nothing new in terms of droughts and tornadoes during the period of so-called man-made global warming in the United States. I'm going to just quickly skip over the issue about flooding. You point out in your book you've got a list of the 10 biggest worst flood events in American history. They happened in 1889, 1928, 1937, 1913, 1927, 1972, 1938, 1913, 1977, and 1911. Not one of those, of course, is in the period of so called man made global warming that's supposed to be causing more floods and worse floods than we've ever seen before. So, again, I mean, folks, you have to look back at history a little bit, right? But now,
Yeah.
everybody is telling us, after all, Al Gore is telling us, and he's the expert, surely hurricanes have to increase with global warming, right? After all, they're formed largely by excess heat in our ocean surfaces, right? And global warming is making the sea surface warmer. So obviously there must be more hurricanes and they must get stronger. And didn't 2005 and 2006, weren't those extraordinary hurricane years for the Atlantic hurricane season? Uh, what do we do with that, Joe?
Well, oh 04, oh 05, both of those years were extraordinary years, well within the realm of what nature is capable of producing. And but then we go 10 years after that without a major hit on the U.S. coast. Even this year, assuming uh, Delta is going to hit the coast as a major, it'll mean that we've tied for the lowest decade ever in the last 100 years for hits on the U.S. coast, major hits on the U.S.
Say,
coast.
say that
And
again,
all
Joe.
this year.
Say that again.
Pardon?
Even if Delta hits as a Category 4, we will
The
still be
category 3 or
tied for the
higher.
lowest decade?
Yeah, we've only had five this decade. Look, there's another thing too. I have what I call power and impact scale. That's more descriptive of these things. Saffir-Simpson scale. 1 minute wind speed at 10 meters. I mean, it could be the size of a football field, and something will be a Category 3 hurricane as far as where that wind's detected. I've got a different scale, and you know, Ike, for instance, Gustav, Sandy, they were all majors because they had a lot of energy spread out all over the place on my scale. But let me just say this:
Hmm.
the way hurricanes can be stronger is the occasional storm where everything comes together. Now, look at this year. We've had 25 named storms, and yet the energy per storm, the accumulated cyclonic energy per storm, is one of the lowest on record because a lot of these things develop in the middle of nowhere, go to 50-mile-an-hour storms. They get a name, everybody flips out over it, but they
Yeah.
don't do anything, right?
Yeah, in
Now,
fact, Neil Frank, whom you know real well, he's been on our program with us, and he's pointed out that a bunch of these storms would not have been named in years
yeah.
past
And by the
because
way,
they didn't keep up that wind long enough, and they wouldn't even have been noticed because we didn't have the instrumentation to notice them. Now they're named, and of course the media compares and it says, "Well, see, we've got 26, 27 named storms
yeah,
this year.
and
That
they don't
hasn't
tell you.
happened."
They don't tell you that the Pacific Ocean has four times the amount of cyclones that the Atlantic Ocean has, and it's at 50% normal, right? By the way, Dr. Neil Frank, it's funny, when I was younger, I was a big pain in his butt because I was always calling the Hurricane Center and all this other stuff. And I sort of I didn't realize that the same things that are driving me now were driving him then. Because he'd go,
Uh-huh.
"Well, we don't know how this is going to turn out. It's an infinite system," and I'd be like, "You got to make a forecast like that, right?" And as I got older, I just realized. I bet you. Although I think I'm a little bit more animated than Neil. I'm Italian though. Frank is not Italian, but I do think we see things eye to eye on the fact that next to the majesty of the entire system, man is very, very tiny as far as that goes. But look, here's what can happen. The occasional storm can do what you see going on, and you get three or four of them. Oh, it's pattern repetition. We issued a map back in April on weatherbell.com. I tweet it out all the time. We don't just tell you that there's going to be 20 storms. We try to tell you where they're going to go. And I'm going to say something that I probably will never issue a better long range forecast for as long as I'm on the playing field, because we had all the areas that you said. We even just said it's going to be the kind of season where things intensify as they come to the coast, and almost all of them have. So, but listen, that was revealing itself back in March and April. If you were looking
Yeah.
at the overall pattern, it was flipping from the winter. So what I'm saying to you folks, any given event can test the limits of nature. All right. What makes you think that nature actually has a limit? I mean, there is a finite limit, but one can go beyond the other, especially if you weren't observing them before. you know,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's hysterical watching what's going on. If it wasn't weaponized, I'd be laughing at it, but it is
Yeah.
weaponized.
Yeah. Now, you do point out in your book that there is an upward trend in the amount of damage done by hurricanes over time, but you explain that that's because there's more property in the path. It has nothing
I
to
mean,
do with
that's
more
included.
hurricanes or stronger
It's
ones.
like the
It's,
wildfires in California. What do you think is going to happen to three times the amount of people living there, and land use, and the fact that the Palmer Drought Index, for instance, takes into account water supply. More people pulling water out. Guess what? You're going to have less water available. So
yeah.
this is what is maddening. And
Yeah.
hurricane damage is increasing. If Hurricane Hazel hit Myrtle Beach today, hit 54, hit Myrtle Beach today, it would cause 50 to 100 times the amount of damage it did then, because Myrtle Beach is now, I don't know if you've been to Myrtle Beach, but there's a lot of property in the way to get run over by a
Yeah,
hurricane now.
yeah.
So you,
Now,
so
you
that,
al- you also say, Joe, that hurricanes today may be weakening as they approach land because
bingo.
of
And
global warming. Why?
yeah,
Why
because
would
what
warming
happens
cause them
again,
to weaken as they approach land?
why? Because if you have lower hurricanes need focus and convergence. They need everything going into the center. If a hurricane is approaching land and it's warm all over the place, right? And the pressures are lower naturally, it begins to unwind. Classic was Florence, right?
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
if they develop late in the game, what is usually going on is there's a lot of cold air around. Harvey, a lot of cold air around before Harvey, right? Right down the Central
Hmm.
Plains. People don't understand.
Hmm.
Texas was having record-breaking cold before Harvey, right? Cold shot came in front of this storm, came in front of Laura. So what does that do? That raises the pressure over the continent, over the U.S. The water's warm. What happens when the wave comes into that? The air is naturally going up because of the forced convergence that's going
Hmm.
on. Guess what happens? So if you can detect that pattern, you can tell your clients in the spring, this is what you have to look for. And that's what I really do.
Okay. All right. And you also recommend, and this really surprised me when I read it in the book because I've always just figured, weather was beyond human control. But you recommend that we try to do something to weaken hurricanes. What would that be, and could it really work?
Oh yeah, I think what happens is the ones that are very strong and very well organized. The goal is to knock it down a category. How would you do that? You want to disrupt the processes. If you drop, we had Project Storm Fury, and what happened was they seeded Hurricane Debbie, and they found significant changes in the eye wall. So what happens is, at first, I'll give you an example. Isidore, back in 2002, gave me this idea. When you hollow out the core of an intense hurricane, right? When you can weaken that core, the outer bands will compete so it can't draw the energy in, right? Because if the
Hmm.
hurricane weakens at the center, the outer bands don't know it's weakening, right? Let's say the processes are causing spiral bands way out here. Well, if the core gets weakened somehow or the other, if you can disrupt the eye wall, and when you see a hurricane where it rains a lot on one side, the eye is being disrupted, so the hurricane weakens. So what I would do is the last 24 hours into the coast, I'd just be hammering away at that, and it's worth the try,
Hammering away with what?
right?
Hammering away
Silver
with what?
iodide, seeding,
Silver iodide in
seeding
order
the
to
whole.
force
Yeah,
condensation so
yeah.
the rain comes
I'm,
down?
I, you'll have trolls say, "Yeah, it says you drop nuclear bombs into the hurricane or something." And I know silver iodide. Well, they did that to the president, but um, uh, you go to Project Storm Fury, read the research. There's all sorts of arguments about it, but what do you got to lose? What have you got to
Yeah.
lose? So, and
Okay.
by the
All
way,
right.
in the book, you also see in the dedication, I say, the other scientists, there are a lot of good people, folks, on the other side of this issue. And there's just a disagreement. All right.
Yeah.
The people that I'm really wondering about are the ones that have taken this issue and are piggybacking whatever agenda they have on it. Okay. If it were up to me,
Yeah.
there'd just be a couple of nerds arguing over whether this is going on, right? But that's not what it's
All right.
like it used to be. That's how it used to be,
Okay.
and not now.
All right. So enough for hurricanes. The next chapter in your book discusses global temperature itself. And you start right off by saying the oceans have warmed dramatically. And you show a couple
Yes.
of graphs side by side. I think our producer can get those up in front of us here. Um, this shows sea surface temperatures in the 1980s and more recently. Well, first explain to us what are we seeing in these two graphs, and then tell us why the oceans are warming so much and what that means for atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration.
Well, the one on the left is where it's blue, it's cold. all right? And you can see how much warmer it is uh, uh, more recently. That puts extra water vapor in the air. It also outsources carbon dioxide. Now, here's the problem, all right? We don't know, quote Neil Frank, we don't know what's going on. I remember him saying one time about a storm that was out in the middle of nowhere and they couldn't get a recon into it. Uh, we don't know what's going on under the vast part of the ocean with underwater thermals and what they call
Hmm.
volcanic hydrothermal vents. And what
Mm-hmm.
happens is if you have them go off, they're suddenly going to warm the ocean. That's the first thing. So if there's an increase in that, the oceans start to warm. The other thing is Bill Gray, Dr. William Gray, the late Dr. William Gray, he talked about
Yeah.
just the cyclical nature of back and forth. Finally, there's a theory I have that I haven't really, it's not a theory, it's a hypothesis, but that there are these large scale, multi decadal to multi century events that go on that intersect. In other words,
Hmm.
do you folks, you know what a rogue wave is? You're out, you see this a lot in the famed Bermuda Triangle, where all of a sudden, out of nowhere comes this huge wave. Well, that's actually an intersection of a bunch of waves that from far, far away that just happen to run across each other at some time. So
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
that is another theory, but it can't. I don't think it's that the increase in CO2 is somehow causing the ocean to warm. I think the CO2 is increasing because of the ocean because it outsources CO2 to the atmosphere. The oceans have
Yeah, just like if you
99.9%.
if just like if you open a hot can of soda, you get a whole lot more fizz coming out than if you open a
Yeah,
very, very cold one. Yeah.
right. So, the atmosphere, the oceans have 99.9% of the thermal capacity, the thermal energy of the entire system. How is it that the increase of one molecule of CO2 out of every 10,000 molecules of air over what, a 100-year period or whatever it is, is, is beating out the sun, the oceans, stochastic events, and the very design of the system? So, I think
Okay.
it's a matter of attribution. But anyway,
All right.
that's to be
Okay.
argued with. But there are a lot of people in geology that don't believe any of this because they know the history of the planet and the history of the oceans and the history of everything else that's going on. So
Okay. You also argue, Joe, that what you call super El Ninos help to drive global warming by adding water vapor to the atmosphere. Again, you use a graph to illustrate that. Can you explain that for us? What are we seeing there,
what
and how is it related to the global warming debate?
well, what happens is the super El Ninos. If you study again mixing ratios, you understand that where it's 85 to 90 degrees, let's say the
Mhm.
water temperature goes from 85 to 88. That sends an immense amount of water vapor in the air compared to, let's say, from 35 to 38. All right. So,
Wow.
what happens when all this water vapor goes up into the air and it spreads out across the planet? It spreads out. Where does it warm? It warms most in the coldest areas. So what I've been saying this for years, and everybody's looking at me. They love to draw a straight line from 1979 up. It looks like there's a step function with every super Nino, and I keep trying to
Hmm.
tell people that you're not rid of the water vapor from the super Nino, 2 or 3 years. In fact, over the Arctic, it's going to stay there. And so you establish new set points. And I think
Hmm.
that, when I'm 87, 88 years old, we'll see the same kind of line that we've seen, that it'll be 20, 30 years. It's essentially the way it is now. But the set points don't increase as much the warmer it gets. Why? Because the warmer it gets, the harder it is to get it warmer. So what happens is you notice the increase before 97, 98, after 97, 98 is greater than this past increase. And so uh, again, this is all simply looking at something using Occam's razor and looking at the simplest solution to the problem. I, I don't think I'm very smart. I just do think that if I see something in front of me, I'm going to ask questions and try to get the answer.
Yeah. Right.
Well, lately we're hearing a lot about weather weirding. What is that, and how have climate alarmists weaponized it?
That's that's a bunch of that's people that don't know what happened before, and when they see something happen, they think this is the worst ever. In some ways, it's narcissistic, in my opinion. You just think, wow, this is going to be the worst thing ever. This is so strange. This is so weird. Let me tell you something. And I don't want you to take this wrong. I wish the weather was as bad as it was when my father was a kid, because it'd be a heck of a lot more fun to forecast. I'm serious. I mean, people have no idea how bad the weather used to be. My father used to tell me that. I was like, yeah, sure. You walk both ways uphill in the snow, barefooted to get to school, right? So, and then I started studying what he was saying because my dad inevitably was right about everything, which makes me mad. But the fact, not really. But the fact is, he was right. I look at that stuff. If I didn't have those maps, I don't believe it could have happened, right? So what happens is, what if you haven't seen that? What if you've just been? What if you didn't love the weather since you were 3 and you just got into it when you were later? You may have been a statistician and you said, "Well, I like the weather, meteorology," or maybe, "Wow, I want to be on TV or whatever." So you've never dug into that. And I'm not knocking those people. I'm just saying, if you go back and look at stuff, you'd be amazed at what you can find.
All right. Well, let's talk about climate models a little bit. Those are the basis of all the claims that man-made global warming is going to change from largely beneficial. And I think it's been pretty clear that the warmth of the last century or so has brought a whole lot of benefits. Uh, the argument is that now the computer models tell us that man-made warming is going to change from largely beneficial to largely harmful. In fact, even catastrophic. Why shouldn't we trust the climate models about that? First of all, what's the evidence that they're wrong? And second, why are they wrong? What are they assuming that they shouldn't?
The only thing I can tell you is if you work with models, you can't you can't think these are the answers. They're much most of the time what the model shows 5 days away is the least likely event. What happens is you get a bunch of different models all over the place and say, okay, let's take the middle, and yet this spreads all over the place. You think this model knows if all of a sudden 3 volcanoes go off? You think this model, and here's the other thing that's wonderful. What does the model do? It's warm. Wait a minute, it's warm to the north, not as warm to the south. The model doesn't want to see that. It knows from the basic equations of physics it should be the other way around. So it tries to spread the warmth out all over there it is, redistribution of warmth. It tries to redistribute across the entire planet. Once it gets there, it instantly feeds back off the overall warming and starts warming it up again, right? So it's a feedback, what we call feedback loop, all right? And apparently they don't think there's any limit to this feedback loop, which completely defies the laws of thermodynamics, which basically say the warmer it gets, the tougher it is to get warmer. And I'll tell you what, the models are having a fit because I look at long range climate models all the time. I've never seen the European generated forecast so bad as it's been over the last 6 months. I'm amazed at it, how
Yeah.
bad it's been. And so you got to understand, and what makes you think that moving out further in time, things become more definite? But you have to work with the things, and you have to keep an open mind, and you have to be able to look at what's happened before.
And you have to be able to just notice the difference between the observations and the model's predictions, which is what's in
Yeah,
that graph that you have in your book there. I mean, the model predictions are running way, 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 way hotter than the actual observations over the relevant period. And if that's so, we know the models are wrong. Now, exactly why they're wrong is a different question entirely. Um,
well, the
so,
warmer it gets, I just explained of the way they're probably wrong because they
yeah,
feed back, garbage in,
yeah,
garbage out.
yeah, yeah. Megan?
Well, you write that the lion's share of the warming from CO2 has already occurred, and we're at the hands of nature and always have been. So, why do you think that CO2's warming potential is shrinking?
Because the warmer it gets, the tougher it is to get warmer. Next to water vapor is so tiny. Its importance, and this is its importance is diminishes with time. When you first introduce something, okay, I tell people this all the time. Let's say you never lifted weights in your life. You go in, start lifting weights, and oh, man, this is unbelievable. I'm lifting 100 pounds more than I was, a month ago. But 2 years later into the process, it's harder and harder to make gains. Same kind of thing. Nature has a common thread, Megan. It limits
Mm-hmm.
itself based on the
Mhm.
overall, the infinite nature of it. Okay, so something as small as CO2, relative, relative to the entire system, it's put most of its input into it. All right, and you got to understand that my Mac is going to go to sleep from a low battery if I don't shut up here because I might have to go get a charger. See what global warming does? It's wrecking my battery. But you got to understand that the CO2 relative to the rest of the system is quite tiny. All right,
Yeah.
so
Right.
But we are
that's
going to run cars on batteries and go back and forth across the country that way, of
you
course,
know
and
what I don't
never run out.
understand. Where's this electricity coming from the electric cars?
I've
Yeah.
wondered that.
Well, Joe, I would love to go on, but we're running out of time. You've also written about the weaponization of academia, how university climate science faculties have become dominated by climate alarmists and why that's dangerous. And you've discussed how an alliance has been formed between climate alarmists and those who want to use the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse to cripple our economies. Folks who want to dig into those topics, as well as how both climate alarmism and COVID alarmism threaten freedom, well, they're just going to have to go to your book. It's a wonderful book. I'm so glad that we were able to get it right after it came off the press. The Weaponization of Weather in the Phony Climate War. As we've said, we'll gladly send it to people totally free as our thanks for a 100% tax deductible donation of literally any size. All they need to do is go to cornwallalliance.org. That's cornwallalliance.org. Click on the donate button, make their donation, and there in the comments field, ask for the weaponization of weather and mention promo code 20 10. I hope we can have you back on the show before too long, Joe. Meanwhile, thanks so much for your time and for your expertise.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And when you run out of books, let me know so I can promote it right where it is because I got to stay ahead of Jane Fonda. I finally pulled ahead of her. She wrote a climate book, and I'm thanking the Academy for getting ahead of Jane. I'm like, Jane Fonda's writing books. What am I going to do?
Wow.
She's free to write all the books she wants. Thank
Well,
you.
thanks for
Enjoy the
joining.
weather. Enjoy the
Go
weather.
ahead.
It's the only weather you got.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you right here next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time.